Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Kalil. Our show is brought to you by Vuori. I have an unhealthy amount of joggers, but Vuori's performance joggers, they take the cake as the most softest, comfortable pants. Make sure to check out the description below for 20% off of your first purchase. On today's episode, I'm joined with Brian Friend to discuss the Noble Games replica jerseys that new this year athletes will receive money for their sales. Now, just yesterday, I had an interview with Todd Melanie from NOBULL, who was able to paint a better picture for us on how exactly this is going to work when it comes to those athletes getting paid and who, in fact, will have their own jerseys. Now, athletes getting paid for their name on the jersey, it seems like a positive thing, but when going through a lot of the comments, Brian, it seems like there's some negativity, especially when we look at inclusivity for the most part. Why do you think it is, in fact, so mixed? And I can even pull up some comments just from the post that we put out. I mean, you're seeing all 40 athletes, they deserve a jersey. Is this a popularity contest? No Travis Mayer. But then, I mean, you hear other people saying, finally, we're excited for this. Athletes deserve jerseys. What are your thoughts?
Was the no Travis Mayer comment from Sevan?
No, it was not.
No,
Maybe if we
no.
scroll down more, we'll find that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the overall feel here should definitely be a positive thing, but I can
Mhm.
understand why there are criticisms, especially once we did find out from Todd what this would actually look like in the application. Um, and basically, it is that kind of that first thing that you said, that there's this general sentiment that all of the athletes who've qualified for the CrossFit Games, that's not an easy thing to do, and that we know that there have been challenges and limitations in terms of earning potential in the sport for a lot of athletes that are kind of on the fringe. And you would think that making the games would be that breakthrough for many of them, but it hasn't been. Additionally, something positive that Noble has done this year is extend the prize purse down to the last place finisher from the CrossFit Games for the individuals, but in the past that hasn't been the case. And so even making the games, we did a documentation of this last year where there was kind of this like loophole around where Alexander Caron actually lost money by making the games
Mhm.
last year. So the sentiment that if the athletes make the games, they should have, and you're going to be selling jerseys of games athletes, they should all have an opportunity to bring in some money from this program, is that totally makes sense. But I do think there's more to the conversation than necessarily meets the eye at first thought.
Okay, so let's take a look at the jerseys. They are on sale now on their website. How many are noble athletes and who are the ones that aren't?
Yes, I believe that there are a total of 14. I think 14 is the right number of jerseys available for sale, and it's basically a 7-7 split.
Mhm.
So, the Noble athletes are like Medeiros, Mel O'Brien, Bailey Rail, Haley Adams, Sam Dancer has one, and I think there's 7 total. Cristiano O'Connell, um, and Tia, of course, Brooke Wells. And then the ones that aren't are, for the most part, the ones that you would expect. You have, uh, you know, well-established athletes like Brent Fikowski, Pat Vellner, Laura Horvath. You have some up-and-coming athletes like Daniel Brandon, Guimayeros. Um, I can't now remember all of them off the top of my head, but they all fall into the ones that are not noble athletes, all fall into one of two categories that Todd talked about yesterday, which is either that they have established themselves as, perennial relevant athletes towards the tops of the leaderboard, or they're athletes like Guy and like Danielle that have made a big splash recently and are very obviously, popular within the sport of CrossFit. Okay, so the ones that I had forgotten were Saxon Panchik,
Yeah.
and
So this is the full list.
yeah, I think I may have gotten everyone else. Now at the bottom, it does say that there are CrossFit Mayhem, Freedom, and CrossFit Reykjavik jerseys. I don't think
Mhm.
you could purchase those now, but I do believe that those would be available once you get to Madison.
Yep. So those will be limited to just at the games, and then you will. Todd said be able to purchase those after the games too if you didn't have an opportunity to get them. Most of these will fall online because they'll continuously restock them. What do you think about the balance between the athletes that we see from the list, or is there balance?
Well, I mean, it's not surprising whether you like it or not. Like, it's not going to be surprising that the Noble athletes are on this list. Obviously, they're a part
Mhm.
of that company. In terms of the other ones that have been chosen, um, it's I think it's kind of what you would expect. And you see some younger athletes we talked about. You see some more established athletes in the Brents, the Pats, the Noahs. And so they've chosen a couple from each group to put in here. And that might be strategic on their end to see, because he did talk about the potential for moving forward in this regard and having more available. And if you have a group of maybe 3 or 4 well-established athletes and you see how their jersey sales do this year compared to some of the younger athletes that are up and coming, that can be a good data point or statistic for them to draw upon on if they're, if for whatever reason they're only able to add a few more in the second iteration of this. Do they want to add more veterans or do they want to add more of the younger athletes? And they can look at that data to make those decisions.
So what about the combination between the legacy athletes and some of those up and comers? Do you think it's a good combination, or there's not enough?
Well, I mean, I do think that there are possibly ways that we could have seen more athletes on this list. But if this was the restricted number that was available to them, I think they did a fairly good job of selecting.
Anything else that stands out from the list that we had in front of us?
Of the list of the ones available, no, I mean it is. I'm curious about Sam Dancer's inclusion on the list. Obviously, he's been a NOBULL supporter from basically day one, so that's not surprising. But the fact that he's now in the Masters division, does open up that realm of possibility potentially down the line as well, and that is exciting.
Okay, so I want to bring up this other list that we gathered with some notable names and even a team that was left off the list. Do you think that these athletes should have had a seat at the table at this point for their jerseys?
Yeah, so we pulled this list and put it together because these athletes and that team kind of all represent slightly different things. So you have people on this list like Bjorgman, Carl Gudmundsson, and Kara Saunders, who are at the top of the respective list that, frankly, I'm surprised that their jerseys are not available. They've been around for so long. They've been so consistently good. And they fall very much in the lines with a Fikowski and a Vellner type of athlete or a Noah Olsen. And I think that that's where I start to ask myself the question, and I was able to find out some more information about this that we can maybe talk about of, what was really available in terms of resources. And basically, from what I know, this was this was tough. After you got the NOBULL athletes out of the way to pick the rest of them, it wasn't very cut and dry about what the best options were, and you had to make some tough omissions in this regard. There's a few other athletes on this list that I think are really important to highlight, and in particular, I would say that Colton Mertens and Emma Lawson are really good examples here. So in Colton Mertens' example, last year he competed at the CrossFit Games. This year he's qualified for the CrossFit Games, and so far from last year's prize money at semifinal, the prize money at the games last year, of which he didn't win any, and the money that he won at semifinals this year, he's totaled $2,000. That's his prize money from qualifying for the games so far in the last 2 years. Obviously, he'll add a little bit to that at the games this year, but if he has a comparable finish to what he had last year in the bottom 10, it's not that much more money. So you're still talking about less than $5,000 total that he's made in 2 years in the CrossFit Games seating, competing and making it to the games both years. Colton Mertens is just one of these guys that has a huge following because he's a unique character. He's a nice guy. He does things differently. He's become buddies with Sevan, who's built him up. And there's a lot of people that I think would love to buy a Colton Mertens jersey. So the fact that he doesn't have that opportunity this year and he wasn't included on that list potentially means in a case like that he might have been able to double his total production or match his production in terms of income through a program like this. And or match the income that he would have made from the games in these 2 years with a program like this. Sorry for that miscommunication or slip up there. But and then Emma Lawson's an interesting one because she kind of reminds me of Danielle Brandon from last year in the sense that, she's been competing. Some people know who she is, but she's kind of like on this upward trajectory and people are super excited about her. And, we did a story last year that tracked Danielle's Instagram followers growth through the games, and it's continued to explode since then. And you just wonder if this program had been available to someone like Danielle Brandon last year, how much money could she have potentially made in her, at the games last season? And now we see Emma Lawson, who's like, if she happens to also have an equally impressive performance and already has this popularity, that might have been a really good opportunity for this year, but she doesn't have it.
Okay, so my question, when I spoke with Todd yesterday, he said that the goal is to eventually have all 40 individual men and women, and even down the line, more teams, age groups, adaptive athletes have their own jerseys. But ultimately, they needed to start somewhere, and this is where they chose to. Todd also mentioned that there could have been an issue with the supply chain of getting this many athlete jerseys. But do you think that this would, in any situation, be something that was feasible, even though it is the first year? Like, is it possible, based on some resources and people you've talked to get a printout of every athlete on a jersey?
Yeah, so I did do a little bit of research in the last day or so since I became aware of this, and talked to some people who are in basically the t-shirt producing company, or industry. And there is a lot, and I learned a lot, way more than I probably needed to know. But the short answer to that is, it would have been possible, yes. It would have been a big task, and it would have taken a really committed couple of people or small team and a lot of time to do it. But
Mhm.
I brainstormed some ideas and bounced them off of these people that I spoke to, about more or less doing what they're trying to do now with this athlete survey for the athletes that don't have jerseys available ahead of time. So and I had this thought, like, if a month ago, and obviously we had the game, the game's roster is continuing to evolve and change as some other things happen. But if a month ago or so you'd put out an opportunity for athletes, or for fans to buy jerseys of athletes that they wanted to support, and it said something like this: for every jersey sale, we give $20 to the athletes. However, there has to be a minimum number of orders that come in to make this practical to do for each athlete this season. Let's just say that number was 50. And if at least 50 people order whose ever jersey it is, then we'll produce those, and you'll have an option to either pick it up at the games from a tent that we'll have on site, or we'll ship it to you, and we can't necessarily guarantee it by the games, but we'll guarantee it by the end of August or whatever date they end up choosing. And therefore you can support the athletes that you want to support. And then in the case of the ones that didn't meet the minimum threshold, we could potentially see something like, we'll refund a majority of your money, but we'll still send the $10 or $20 to the athlete to support them this year. It just wouldn't make sense for us to produce that many shirts because of the scale and whatever else. So I thought that might have been a potential solution. I had thought of it. I had some other people suggest or kind of weigh in on that. Even some athletes that I spoke to had kind of offered some advice or insight there. And it seems like, yeah, that is potentially something that could happen. But there would have been some logistical challenges at some point, and it would have just been a matter of commitment of resources on NOBULL's end to make that something like that happen.
And it's funny because we were even talking a little bit about this offline. But so, if, for instance, I really, really want a Travis Mayer jersey, if I sit here, I can submit as many surveys as I want. Travis Mayer, Travis Mayer, Travis Mayer. But then if they're like, okay, we'll make one, only a couple of people buy that jersey, it's actually not really helping the athlete the way that it was intended to, correct?
Yeah, I haven't gone in and submitted any surveys yet, but I think that survey process, like, what you don't, that's not what you don't want to happen.
Hmm.
So you might want to have it like linked to an email address. So you can only submit one per email address, so that there's a higher likelihood that if 1,000 submissions for mayor come in, that more percentage of them will actually buy
It's a
that.
thousand people.
Yeah,
Sure.
or at least 1,000 email addresses, because it's still like, you'd have to then go through the process of creating more email addresses to submit more surveys, which most people probably would give up at that point.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past some people out there, Brian. You never really know. So ultimately, why do you think that Noble decided to release the amount of athletes they did and do it the way that they decided to?
So I think this is actually kind of the most important part of the conversation, and it's more of understanding who NOBULL is and how they go about doing business. Now, NOBULL, if you're a CrossFit fan right now, NOBULL is a huge brand and company in your mind, because they're this title sponsor for the CrossFit Games, and you see their stuff at these events, and you'll see all the great stuff that they've put together at the games, flashy billboards, the big
Mhm.
merchandise store, and everything else. But they're still a small company, and they do have limited resources. And in talking to them today, they explored different options here, and they considered broadening this horizon this year, but it's kind of in their MO to see how things go on a smaller scale before they go to the bigger scale. And so even though it is a bit discouraging this year for a lot of the athletes and a lot of the fans that there is this kind of limitation on who they can support with the initiative of this program, it's the first step that in NOBULL's mind and in the way that they operate as a company is necessary to creating that opportunity for more people down the road. And, when I say that, like, kind of what their MO is, NOBULL has made some very big initiatives into other markets in the past year or two, including the NFL, the NHL, PGA. They're making these impacts into major sports markets, but they're the way that they're going about doing that is very actually kind of cool. It's not that they're trying to rebrand NOBULL as an NFL company. It's that they're bringing stuff that they've created within the ecosystem of CrossFit to different markets, which happen to be really big markets, with the hope that those markets will actually drive interest up for CrossFit overall. And so you can kind of see that in the same vein here, so to speak, where they're trying this out this year with the intention of expanding in the future. But they want to see two things. One is, how many of these jerseys do we really sell? And I think actually they have a kind of unintended advantage of comparing to last season, when there wasn't the incentive for the athletes to get something out of it, because they could look at their numbers from 2021 and look at 2022 and see if with this added incentive for fans, did our numbers go up? That's one data point. And secondly, like we talked about earlier, with the kind of diversity that they have some international athletes, they have some younger athletes, they have some veteran athletes, and they have their own athletes. Some of their own athletes, like Bailey Rail, would not be on this list if not a NOBULL athlete. But they can also compare a data point from someone who's probably going to be in the middle of the pack at the games and say, well, how did her jersey sales do compared to someone who's on top of the podium in a Tia-Clair Toomey? So they're going to gather all this information in addition to the surveys, which hopefully is an accurate representation of the people who are actually interested in buying jerseys for that athlete. And with that information, my hope, and knowing those people over there, I do feel good about this, is that they'll strongly consider that and start, hopefully early on in the process after the games this year, putting into action the necessary steps that they need to make sure they have the resources to increase the robustness of this program next season.
Right, because Todd did say this is just the beginning. They're looking at a bigger picture down the line. But Brian, today, what is your bottom line?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is it's okay to be critical and to ask questions about something like this. I can certainly understand where certain groups of people or athletes are frustrated about it, but I would encourage people to zoom out a little bit. I think NOBULL has the intention of being in this for the long run with CrossFit, and they're trying to move things in the right direction here. I think that Todd and his whole team is aware of the fact that there's people have a greater desire than what they can deliver on right now, but that doesn't mean that they don't want the same thing too.
Yeah. Brian, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's sending in questions. Keep doing that, because it helps us build out these shows so we can better serve you guys and talk about a deep dive like the NOBULL jerseys. So thanks, and we'll see you for the next show.